Welcome to the Journal of Educational Controversy and a book review of Reclaiming Education for Democracy by Paul Shaker and Elizabeth Heilman. I'm here in the studio with Molly Lawrence and Vale Hartley, who'll tell you what they do in a moment, and I'm Rosalie Romano from secondary faculty in Western Washington University. Molly, what do you do?
Thanks, Rosalie. I work with teacher candidates in the secondary education program at Western Washington University, and I'm really excited in my work with them to play around with democratic practices, which constantly push me to keep learning and listening and understanding.
Hi, and I'm Vale Hartley. I'm a teacher in a K-8 role. I teach what you would think of as 3rd to 5th graders at Whatcom Day Academy. I'm also here as a parent. I have children of my own. And in my classroom at Whatcom Day Academy, we practice democratic skills and dispositions. Our school belongs to something called the League of Democratic Schools. So I was invited to take part in this book review because of my experience with democratic practice in the classroom.
One of the things we hold in common is a value. I'd like to read our definition of democracy. It's an infusing the power of citizens' voices and values into every part of public life and removing any highly concentrated power due to money or governance itself. So we really do agree with this notion of democracy in a very Deweyan sense, infusing every single aspect of our life, particularly the classroom. And so I wanted to frame our discussion of the book around the work that we actually do. It's not irrelevant to us. It is actually in our bones, I think, just like chalk dust is for all of us as teachers. And that is to pay attention to some of these habits of mind that emerged through our entire process that are in fact democratic practices. So I'm thinking of how we began with very serious critical thinking and critique and moved into those differences, the challenges where we found our difference, into a deliberative dialogue where we really had to sit with one another and hear the point of view. And when that happened, it aroused these multiple perspectives and we sparked each other instead of closing down. And out of that came, and I think it's alluding to what you were feeling, a deep respect for one another, not just for our experiences, but for our points of view, for the references that we're making. And out of that constituted and forged a very deep sense of trust and love between us. And I think that that has been for me my takeaway, as they say in school, that it has been absolutely wonderful to be able to share a vision of democracy that isn't conformist or thin in any way, but that by virtue of our trust and desire to understand, we actually keep forming it and reforming. I don't know if it's reclaiming, but we're certainly doing some here. And maybe allow ourselves to think a while about what we think that the authors were trying to do.
And also, are they making a persuasive case for this reclaiming of democracy? So what were they trying to do? What are their major arguments? And do they make a persuasive case for that?
Well, and that kind of begs the question that left me wondering, what does reclaiming democracy mean? I mean, we had a lot of conversation about what is democracy, and I think we had generally a common understanding about what that meant. But what it meant to reclaim, I mean, part of that implies that there wasn't, that it was absent.
Or that we had it.
Or, yeah, more than that it was there to begin with, and it went away, and then it came back. So what is that about?
I actually today, in preparation for this, went back to look up that word again because I was curious.
Reclaim?
You're the dictionary queen. Yeah, go for it.
Well, and the definition that I ended up writing down for today was reclaim means to redeem from a state of vice, which I thought was very interesting because I wasn't resonating with the idea of reclaim as to bring back to what was there before in light of how I experienced this book. So that was the definition that I took away. And which was very interesting then, I think, juxtaposed next to democracy. Reclaiming, which is to redeem from a state of vice. Democracy. And I guess my interest in that was just, is it possible, if you're starting from that perspective, that where we are is a state of vice, and all these things are wrong or bad, is it possible then to really engage in the democratic process, was my question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when you put that word vice in, it triggers for me, oh my gosh, this is a state that is not moral.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And education is nothing. I mean that seriously, is nothing if not a moral endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
That is the heart of
Mm-hmm.
education. Because we touch the lives of children.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not thinking about morality in terms of catechism. I'm thinking in terms
Mm-hmm.
of the endeavor itself being to constitute life, help grow life,
Mm-hmm.
so that life flourishes,
Mm-hmm.
not in any one particular way.
Mm-hmm.
But the touching of the word vice now
Mm-hmm.
has just brought another shift in my mind about, how, is this as the morality of teaching?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's one of the arguments that the authors were making was that the current state of education is so market-based, it's so based on the cultural values and the political ideologies of the time that we have lost this whole set of values linked to citizenry and democracy. And then the question is how do we reform that? Or how do we move to a new place?
So that was one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about early on, was that it seemed like most of the book, at least the first kind of front-loaded, was a lot about problems with especially No Child Left Behind, which is the subtitle of the book, which is Reclaiming Education for Democracy, Thinking Beyond No Child Left Behind. So that was the context in which it was written. And there was quite a bit of information about the corporate influences in education today, the idea that education, the purpose of education is largely to train workers rather than that kind of liberal arts focus for kids, and information about not just corporate influence in raising workers, but also the monetary influences behind education itself, textbooks, testing, and
It's an industry.
yeah, the
Of
whole industry that
enormous
supports education in its current form. And whether we go down the vice track or not, at least there is, the authors, I think, have a pretty significant belief that those are not, as you would say, moral influences on, or later on as they come to discuss it as humanistic
Right,
perspectives about how to think about what education is for in a democracy. So that's kind of what led us to that, if you will, negative perspective.
Right. And I don't know if they're necessarily saying that those influences, that we can just, sweep them under the rug and that they're going to disappear, as much as I feel that they're encouraging us to reintroduce the humanistic complexity of education's purpose and what that would look like and how we then show that and how we talk about it. So
I think they were trying to avoid that what Dewey calls the either or. The humankind really likes to make everything black and white,
There was
either
a-
or.
Do you think they were trying to avoid it? I mean, one of the things we talked a lot about is how we felt like there was so much of it.
There
That
was.
On the one hand, they were complaining about it in kind of the constant references to neoliberal influences behind, not even behind the scenes, but overtly in front of the scenes. And yet we found that as much as they kind of saw that as a negative influence, they fell into that trap
They fell
themselves.
into that trap. But I again, the generous read. I have a sense as I think back on the book that the power of these forces, this concentrated power of unbelievable greed that now is infiltrating. Because when you and I began classroom teaching, I'll bet we did not have. There was a barrier between corporations and school. You would not find brand name juice machines, or you'd find Apple machines at best. You would not find fast foods in our cafeteria.
And media sponsors for internal communication systems and
No advertising. So the infiltration of and the creating of a semi-permeable and now absolutely there is no barrier. When you go to even children's games in high school, there's all
the stadiums and
there is incredible amounts of advertising. So the sense of trying to make not an either or, but to try to unpack this, I am sure, as they began to critique and analyze and write to this, was a powerful force in and of itself to say, this is so serious. So yes, I would agree that they did dichotomize, but I'll say it's because it is, for them, it is a matter of democratic life or democratic death. And so there is that sense of, do you see what is happening? And they did fall into the trap of either, just like I'm doing. Right, okay. Yeah.
I'm wondering then, in light of your description of the authors falling into, the left side or the other side of the equation in terms of the humanistic and the moral domain of education, progressive education. I'm wondering if we are about democratic practices and principles, then if you go into that reaction mode, if you fall to the other side of the continuum, and if you are fighting, if you can do democracy. I don't know.
Wow. If you consciously choose to be in that space, can you do democracy?
Because I'm thinking here of Naomi Klein, I think, had a really interesting analysis of the whole tactic that was taken with the media, which was a very crisis-based tactic, and how in framing what was happening as a crisis, that leads large groups of the population to go into fear mode and reaction mode, and it seems like blindly following something as equally as problematic as reacting to it. So I'm wondering if the authors are falling into the trap of anti-democracy by fighting.
Or are the authors, given the profound power in our society right now, given the media and corporations, are the authors actually standing and saying, this is how you do democracy, this is how you speak truth to power, this is how you name the world, so that, because everything is unnamed, everything is soundbited, everything actually is like, you don't see it, it's always foggy. We have these acronyms, even for terrible tragedy. Are in fact, our authors naming the world?
I think that's something, as you were talking about the transformative experience of reading this book and thinking about it over time, I think that's something that, even hearing you say that, I have a better understanding, I think, now than I did early on. Because, like you say, truth to power, thinking beyond No Child Left Behind. I mean, for a number of years prior to this and during this time, No Child Left Behind was a huge burden, if you will, and experience that all public schools and teachers were going throughout the country. It's been a little bit, mitigated in some ways, but yes. And so for two authors to take that on and say, what is there beyond this? How can we do, where do we go from here? And your idea of truth to power, one of the things that they talk about in here is the role of the the teacher and the power that teachers have had in the past. Not power, but respect and influence in the way that teachers were seen, as a way to educate children, and the public in general respected that. And there were differences, but there was more, perhaps, consensus about the role of teachers and what teachers were expected to teach. That wasn't always perfect. We know there are issues with history and so forth. But one of the author's points is that the way No Child Left Behind is being implemented today is undermining that respect for teachers.
Right.
So, and the authors, one of the points they make is that because teachers are in that important role of educating the future generation, they do have a kind of power that many other people in society don't have, that in some ways, some parts of society today see almost as subversive, because teachers have the opportunity to show children that other side of what's happening in the world, that truth to power. What is that media influence about? So it's not just about turning it off, it's about recognizing that kids are deeply immersed in it, and how can we teach them to view that critically. And in some ways, that's one of the scariest things about democracy, is that it's all about critical thinking. And I think that in some ways, and they talk a lot too about that fear-based society that you were talking about, and the tendency for, again, that dichotomizing, but of the right, the conservative viewpoint, to be stuck in where we are and wanting to keep, where we came from, rather than that taking a risk and moving into that change and the future piece. So moving beyond the fear to embracing something new. And I think that's where teaching is, and that's what democracy, your point about Dewey, that's really what we need to have to be a living, breathing, healthy democracy.
Society.
Yes, society, and that's a scary part. And we as educators are on the cusp. Good education is about keeping kids on the cusp. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. And moving them forward. And that's pretty terrifying for some people.
It is always the terror. Absolutely. Vale, when you and I began teaching in the classroom, maybe it was so for Molly as well, but we were curriculum makers. Our authority was in part epistemological. We were expected to find the major themes and concepts and to create engaging, powerful inquiries or approaches to learning that did not indoctrinate, but rather invited students into that critical thinking, into that space of, oh, we don't know.
And not just the critical thinking, but bringing who they were to that space.
Yes.
Yes.
So that authentic voice and that individual
agency.
Agency. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's both the thinking piece and the who you are piece,
And the
which
who you
together is pretty powerful.
Democratic citizens. That's what.
And a
alive.
responsibility for taking part. That's another part of citizenship. It's not just being there and watching it go by, but it's that not only do you have a voice, you have an obligation to use it, and to be educated in such a way that you can put it to good use. John Goodlad talks a lot about that critical literacy piece, the thinking and the communicating piece about, what is happening. How do you not only think about it, but how do you read? Understand what you're reading, understand what's around you, back to that media piece, and that you need to do something about it.
Question or
Act.
So maybe then, in light of that, you need to do something about it, and you need to be able to read the lay of the land that's around you. Perhaps that's one of the things that these authors did for many, and for us, is to provide a lay of the land. There's a lot going on that it's probably difficult to see, and it's probably difficult to think about, how would my voice make its way into that space? And so perhaps the two things that it's done, one is show the lay of the land in its complexity, and then perhaps the other piece is provided a space and a sense of urgency around the need for voices that are being silenced, the deprofessionalization of teachers, etc. So I wonder if...
Arthur C. Clarke said, any teacher who could be replaced by a robot should be. I agree. It is such a human endeavor, this moral endeavor of teaching. And in looking at the thread that I think they kind of got lost in as I read this, the threat of neoliberalism, of the constraining of the kind of thinking, and in fact, democratic community that can be forged, not taught. It is forged and modeled and lived in the classroom, so that young people feel, oh, that's what it means to be a part of. That's what it means to have voice. That's what it means to name. All of that is perhaps what they're asking when you were talking. Do in fact the authors allow us to find our space to engage in the democratic process, which means that in spite of the constraints around us, we can do democracy. We can. Because actually, it goes one little group at a time. So is that the reclaiming? Just the discussion of teaching as a moral endeavor and what that looks like for us in our schools, in our own classrooms. Is that the place to start?
Is this the book we thought we were getting when we read the title? Yes or no? And is one of the questions we posed for ourselves, what would be in the book we wished we'd read that maybe wasn't in this book, but you're kind of implying in a way that those things that we wished we'd read were really there at a level in the surface that maybe we didn't catch them the first time around. I kind of...
I was picking up on that too.
Because...
Well, I'm just wondering if in fact we've... it's a harsh book. It's a harsh book. I say that because it was difficult to read what I think all of us who've experienced the constraints and I think oppressive power of de-skilling teachers. So it's painful to read in that regard, because I don't disagree. I don't think we disagreed. I think following the thread of their argument, sometimes they kind of didn't help us go back to because the power of democracy is always in hope, not cynicism. And so, I'm not that we got cynical, but we did get, what is the book we really want?
Well, and part of that was just the volume of it. I went back and counted the pages, and it's roughly 3/4 of the book lays out a history of kind of this neoliberal influence. Yeah, the vices, what's been happening, how we came to where we are today. And that is most of the book. And each of those chapters has a little bit in it about kind of the counterpoint of, the democratic perspective, but not very much. And it isn't until the last 1 or 2 chapters that the authors move on to what would it look like today, how can we talk about democratic education in more of a progressive way, what would that look like? And that's where we started thinking about what could this book have been like. Go ahead, Molly.
Well, I was just thinking, when it did go to the space of talking about what this could look like, I kept wanting to feel like that was integral to the author's lived experience. And it came from a place of having lived it and having seen it and having been alive, and
that organic, we talked about it as an organic.
It was hard not to have any of the how do we do this that didn't feel external. That was a challenge for me, because I think that all of us in this group, and many educators, teacher educators, public school educators, private school educators, are committed to living democracy, and that's very central to what they do and what they are with their students. And I just wanted to have more of an opportunity with the authors to think about, well, how do we do this within this climate and culture that's fraught with these tensions that you've elucidated? What would that look like in today's world? How is that different from the past? I mean, because these are time-worn suggestions and ideas and values, so.
Well, and also, one of the first things that I came to, that idea of what was missing that we wish we'd seen, was a heart and passion piece. And maybe that's a whole different book. I got, the voice and the tenor, the intent of this book seemed to be. It had a very dry and academic feel to it, which was maybe appropriate for what they were trying to do. But I think as people that are out fighting the battle on the daily front, you know, we have a lived experience of living in No Child Left Behind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really need somebody to tell me what that's like. But I think what we need in some ways is inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's like the I want the Obama version of reclaiming democracy. And that heart and passion, which maybe these authors weren't attempting to write to that. So that's one piece. And the second piece that you just mentioned was that how to create an authentic experience of democracy for students. And I think many people's idea of teaching for democracy is teaching civics lessons rather than living a democratic life, the habits of mind that you spoke of. And that's what I think many of us need more help with, and
Yeah.
some people really don't have any idea how to do that. And that's really the book. I think there are some books out there, but there's nowhere near, I think, enough information about how to do that well, not only in school, but in society.
Just the whole project of democracy has been reduced to a soundbite, it seems to me, in this 21st century, when there was so much hope that things could be different. Well, they did kind of go south and different, but but Dewey has written on this. Good lad. You know, Henry Giroux says that schools reflect society, and that's so. If this is so, if his theory is true, then
Oh.
we are in fact
Uh-oh.
right there. That's which would
Yeah, that's the book.
That's the book we read.
That's you get what you deserve. This is it. Yeah.
one of the things that Walter Parker, who also writes extensively on democracy, has one of my favorite articles on teaching against idiocy, a wonderful article by Walter Parker, in which just in the first two sentences, he takes the word idiot and moves it away from the pejorative, doesn't know anything, and situates it in its home, original home, which is ancient Greece. And he said, you know, when in ancient Greece, in the seat of our democratic ideals, anyone who only thought of himself, who did not participate in public life, who had no idea or interest of the commons, of the common good, so he was called an idiot. And I think it's important for us to actually begin to think about those, not in terms of historical views, but to look at what counts today as democracy. It is the civics textbook, if that.
Well, and often it gets to reduce to the soundbite version is the right to vote.
Ah, yes, the right
If
to
you're
vote.
someplace you have a right to vote, you're in a democracy, and that's it. And as a citizen, that's your only responsibility is to go vote.
So I'm talking to my candidates, and I'm asking them, how many times do you hear the word democracy in your classrooms or in your in the
school.
books you read, or when you go out into the schools and in your practica? Not many. And I said, well, then how many of you are sort of understanding and can articulate connections between democracy and education? And it is oftentimes with a blank stare, which is one of the reasons I use the Journal of Educational Controversy in my classroom as text, because there's multiple perspectives. It requires engagement across differences, deliberative dialogue, and actually a practice of naming the world and speaking your voice. But if we in fact, if we are to take the view of the authors and see how, in fact, they're claiming that the whole democratic project is, in fact, not just almost out our classroom doors, I think it's out of our school doors. One of the things that replaces it is deprofessionalization of teachers in the form of textbooks, of incredibly enormous power of test scores, and also the way we ask our students to live within the school. So I ask candidates, what has been your experience in your high school or your middle school, any schooling? And it's a joke. So yesterday, five people out of my class shared that they were ASB president or they'd been an ASB, but really we only got to do, to talk about the color of something, or it was clearly nothing important that they got to do, which of course we could argue is seeding cynicism, which is the handmaiden of idiots. Because why wouldn't you want to be involved in the commons and the common good? Well, because it doesn't do any good. Because
But if the ways in which you are involved in the common good are insignificant.
yes.
Well, and it's interesting. I've read kind of similar reports about high school experience with democratic education, and a lot of what I've seen tends to support the idea that where it exists, most of it is in elementary schools. And I think part of that is because elementary school teachers, at least historically, have had more control over what they do in their classrooms and how much time they spend doing what. So we have the opportunity, like in my class, to have class meetings, to have impromptu class meetings when there's an issue that comes up, and really live that voice and group decision-making and deliberating whenever I want to, really. I mean, and high schools, when are you going to do that? When they're in math from here to there, and PE and art and whatever, they don't create those opportunities in the same way, not in an authentic, genuine way when it's really relevant to the students.
It's far more
So-
difficult to know who your students are as well.
Oh, I mean, the problems are enormous. So I take great pride in being an elementary school teacher, in which I can. But then it's disheartening to me because I send my children off, and then what? It's just you have the same thing all over again. They've practiced, they've learned, they have an awareness, and they go nowhere. And will those things stick with them as they move on in their educational careers and don't have any other practice? I don't know.
I think this is, again, going back to what the authors had to say. To me, this is probably one of their primary arguments in the book is, of course, we need to be moving in that direction, and how do we do that? And that then takes me back to our question of, well, okay, so what is the book we wanted to read? And when I hear our part of the dialogue, I think, yes. And then I think, and I want the people on the other end of the spectrum that have been labeled in the, the category that's taking us down this hill. High schools partially do that because of structure, partially do that because there's this economic impetus to, perform, make sure you're prepared for college, make sure you get your degree. And so I would love it if this book had more of a space for that other part of the dialogue, the whole economic piece that is integrally connected to our democratic system. Like, what do we do with that?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So part of this is the imagination. Part
Yes,
of this is,
thank you.
which is really where in elementary school it is okay to have imagination, not so much later on. I mean, that's our problem, right? But in fact, the social imagination is critical to living democracy, absolutely critical, because you're right. Please, teachers teach for a time we cannot predict.
Exactly.
We cannot predict. And it is a leap of faith, but faith built on incredible intellectual rigor of what are these concepts? What are these themes? How do you think about this? We need to write. How do we become active? This is the life of a classroom, not sound bites of factoids that actually not only dumb us down, but worse, is suppress our imagination.
They anesthetize us, as that lovely RSA Animate Changing Education Paradigm video shares.
We get numb.
Yeah, the other thing that came to mind while you were talking about that, and the book does refer to briefly kind of at the end, was that kind of human spirit component of education, not in a religious sense, but in a sense of looking to humanity and what we have in common and our obligation to work on creating a society that betters all of us and not just the individual. And I think that's one of the problems with the economic corporate model in our society today is it's really all about individual success, often at the expense of people in other countries, people everywhere, that competition. And so how to imbue our teaching and our perspective with our students with that larger view of
Connection?
Yes.
and thinking beyond their own needs. Like in our class meetings, it's often about, how can we solve the problem of the group, really the good of the group, often above the individual, which kids in today's society don't often get a lot of practice with. And we as adults don't often get a lot of practice with. So that's really important.
Yeah.
As I'm listening to our ideas just sort of begin to take shape, I'm just wondering, since this is a review of the book, who would use this book? I'm wondering if we are in fact agreeing that this book is helping name a world that's rather harsh and difficult to name, and it is complex, then who might benefit from reading and engaging as we did in democratic dialogue?
Well, one of the notes that I had kind of as a transition from the book we wish we'd had to the idea of who might use it was using it as a way to craft interactions between diverse groups of people in a non-confrontive kind of context. So because I think the book would be a great tool to invite people to come together to talk about the same ideas that we've been talking about. What is education in a democracy? What is it going to look like? Where just the same things we've been talking about. Did we ever have it? Where'd it go? Do we still have it today? Do we have parts of it today? So people that are wondering about those kinds of questions, I think, could benefit from this book. And I know when I first read it, I found myself thinking, who is the audience for this book? On the one hand, it's so heavy and it's so dry and it's lacking heart and feels like bits and chunks. And I mean, it's a history of education, kind of, but not a complete history,
It's a kind of critique as well.
So, we found ourselves asking, really? So I think I think it's best served by people really wondering how to create, perhaps, a more inclusive and inviting kind of education for democracy. And it would also show them what some of the hurdles that they have to overcome. That could be useful.
I think that's a good point.
So who would those people be? That's who we were wondering.
Oh, I'm thinking of in our community, it would certainly be. I'd probably begin with teachers and administrators, just because we always could learn to talk better across each other, to be able to remind ourselves, because our work is so hard. It's actually so demanding. I read a study about the hundreds and hundreds of decisions that a classroom teacher makes every day, that people can't possibly know. I mean, it's very demanding to be a teacher and an administrator as well. So begin closest. But then I could see, certainly school boards, I think you mentioned, community. What an incredible, the Kettering Foundation has this deliberative dialogue model that has people, constituents from all around the community to come and discuss very thorny issues. But democracy is created in such places with such people that it's not created by people that you all agree with. Actually, quite the opposite. Democracy is all about being able to listen, to respect, and to be able to hear the other person, to see what their points are, not to agree or to conform. But in that complex moment that we each had as we read this and disagreed and did not stop.
Well, and it's not about trying to convert that person to your perspective
Not at all.
either. I think that's
Understand.
to really listen is something different.
But I think that enlarged our own space. I mean, our transition into some transformation here was because we didn't let go. And that's what democracy needs. People who have a tenacity towards freedom, not towards oppression, but towards freedom and imagination for what might be.
So from that perspective, we do agree that the book became, maybe it didn't begin as, but it became a compelling read in the sense that we weren't willing to just put it down and write it off. So I think it's best read in community. So as a group in some way, kind of a book discussion group model. And so your idea of administrators and teachers could be like a professional learning community. Take this on maybe as a school that's choosing to take on democratic education in a larger way. It could be people, as you said, in a school board or maybe a school board PTA, some kind of community context.
Nice.
Yeah, parents and professionals trying to find some way, perhaps, too, in a place where they already have some kind of tension in the community, whether it's about immigrants in the school or some kind of a difficulty. This could be a way to kind of help frame some of those conversations. You wouldn't have to read the whole thing. They could pick out specific parts and then
Around the issues that were surfacing.
yeah, I mean, I teach with Socratic seminars sometimes. You could pick out a particular portion of the book and use it very intentionally, perhaps as you do with your students or in the larger community role, about what really would this mean? What would it look like? I mean, what are we doing? What could we not do? You know, whatever.
And students should be involved in these deliberative dialogues.
Wouldn't it be great for those ASB people, those people in high school
Yes.
that are wondering, I mean, do they know anything about No Child Left Behind in their experience? I mean, where is their voice in anything that happens?
And you know, in deliberative dialogue, the model has people who lead, not tell, not
Facilitators.
teach, but they sort of facilitate. But actually, they guide and lead, and or co-lead. I could see students actually taking that role with the adults. I just have to say again, I think that I'm glad we waited to review this book and to really allow not so much the authors, but I thank them because they prompted us to actually pull out of our own habits of mind these democratic processes with which to become colleagues, friends, and to deepen our relationship. So I am very, very grateful to have had this opportunity. Thanks, Molly
Me too.
and Dale.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for joining us.
Yes, we recommend the book, and you too could have that same kind of intimate, almost intimate experience that we got from being in the same place, trusting each other, and traveling down this path. So I thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to the authors for that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.